Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Yorke, why don't you tell us what's up on the screen? What is this that we're seeing and that we were hearing?
All right,
just a few moments ago?
my name is Yorke Rhodes from Microsoft. So welcome everyone to this wonderful summer evening. This is actually something that I found recently when I don't know why I found it, but I came across it. And it's it's called Sonic Pi, which is basically, it's called that because it's a programming tool that actually will run on a Raspberry Pi, which is a tiny little computer. But you can run it on a Windows machine or a Mac machine as well. And what's really interesting about this, the opening TED Talk that I saw was the speaker basically asked the audience, and you can play along here, do you read and write? Let me see a show of hands. And so, are you professional writers? Anyone professional author, professional writer? Not many, but you all read and write, right? So let me see a show of hands for people who can program. Programmers? A couple in the room, okay? So the analysis here was, well, everybody can read and write, but not everybody can program. And we're sort of moving into this world where everybody probably should be able to program in some way or another. And this is actually a great tool for teaching programming to anybody who is musically inclined, AKA almost any child, right? So it's a great tool for helping children understand how to do loops and program sounds. And there's actually a whole bunch of libraries and stuff online that you can do that with. And what the example that you saw here was essentially doing a DJing live with a live looping program and changing the sound as, instead of like mixing decks, actually just using programming to change the audio. So that what you heard was a recording of actually a live DJ set. So it's a pretty cool tool, and you can see actually the language there on the screen as well. So welcome. I just thought it was a good example of disruptive, interesting technologies, and looking forward to the evening.
All right, very cool. And along those lines, a round of applause is appropriate, please. No need to ever hold back applause, especially when I'm up here. Today, we are blessed. I always want to say blessed. Gosh, I'm an atheist, so like every time I get to say blessed, it's like really cool. To be here at Microsoft, right? So I'm here to kind of kick things off, get you guys excited about the presentation, but also to thank the people who make this all possible. And the first and foremost organization is Microsoft. They're the ones providing the space here, and we have nothing but good things to say about them. It's been a very interesting journey. I've been a Microsoft guy for many years. I have an IT background, so we've always sold the Microsoft solution stack. I usually come up here and talk about BizSpark, which is one of their great programs. But today, just thinking about what the nature of a disruptive technologist is and companies that are disrupting things. And it's funny because Microsoft is actually one of the biggest disruptors disrupting Microsoft, right? Everything is changing. Azure is now the thing. Windows is it's not deprecated, but it's certainly taking a back seat these days compared to what's happening with the cloud. So very excited to be here, and we want to thank them, give them a big round of applause for letting us use this space. Also, one of our primary sponsors, McCarter and English, and I'm going to read a little bit about them because this is too much to commit to memory. But it is a firm of over 400 lawyers with offices in Boston, Harvard, Stanford, Newark, East Brunswick, Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Washington, D.C. Apparently, they've been in continuous business for more than 170 years, which in and of itself is incredible, as they are one of the oldest and largest law firms in America. Now, with McCarter and English, they're specializing kind of in this space. So for them, clients come first, right? The goals and priorities are what count. And their job is really to listen to their clients, stay on top of the frequent changes that affect those goals, and also to implement the strategies that lead to success. And being able to apply that for 170 years, that's pretty impressive. They're honored to be chosen, or the chosen law firm of clients ranging from Fortune 100 companies, big guys, Microsoft probably is a client of theirs, and emerging growth companies down all the way to individual people. So McCarter and English, thank you guys. Also out there, in case anybody was thirsty, you probably grabbed a Hint water. If you didn't, you should grab one. Yeah, I see one in the background. Very good. Infused with fruit flavors, Hint's healthy flavored water is a great alternative to sugary drinks while being delicious. Hey, I copied and pasted right off their website. And would they lie on their website? No, they would not. No GMOs, no preservatives, no added sweeteners. Good stuff. I mean, it's just delicious. You drink it, makes you happy. Dana, our esteemed colleague has provided us with wine as per usual. I didn't see her here. Maybe she's here, but if not, we'll thank her in our hearts as we're drinking delicious wine. And Witham Smith. So I'm not sure even, like, do they pronounce it Witham? Is it Wytham? It's funny because whenever I see it written down, it reminds me of Baby Got Back, Sir Mix-a-Lot. He had game, but he chose to hit him, so I pull up quick to get with him, right? And it's like I see that and I hear that in my head. That is not what they do, and
that's how they.
I guess because Ari Melber can.
Yeah, it works.
That is how, yeah, definitely. But they are actually. I'll read this from their website. They're a nationally ranked top 30 firm that empowers clients with innovative tools and solutions to address their accounting, tax, and advisory needs. But they've been a great sponsor. We're really, really happy to have them on board. Highly responsive team of professionals offering deep industry expertise and service experience to help their clients grow and thrive. So be in a position of strength. So thank you guys from Witham. And if I am mispronouncing that and there is somebody who knows how that is to be pronounced, please feel free to correct me. Visiotag, the guys providing our video, thank you very much. They've got an incredible platform as well for coding and tagging the video that we're going to see. So being able to automatically code and identify content within the video stream so that you can immediately jump to something that is relevant to you. I sit and I watch a lot of YouTube videos and trying to, if you double tap the screen on your iPhone, right, it skips ahead 10 seconds. I do that. I actually skipped, I think I hit a record the other day. I tapped ahead to go 2,000 seconds ahead. I was just going, I wish I had Visiotag. So, and with that, I think that is everybody that I wanted to thank. But now I do want to turn it over. We have a very, very special guest, Vint Cerf. For those of you who don't know, father of the internet, inventor or co-creator of TCP/IP. I mean, look him up. He's huge on Wikipedia, right? You can't miss him. And with that, let me turn it over to you guys so you can actually get him on live for us.
Let's see.
Hi there, it's Vint.
Hey, Vince, how are you?
I'm awake. How about you?
Doing great. Listen, from the Hard Times Square, we're here with the whole team at Disruptive Technologists. Very
Terrific.
excited. We got a full room, very high expectations for you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. Now you set the expectations high. That's no pressure, right? No pressure. Well, I have a little friend here with me that I wanted to show you. This is my little friend, the alligator. And I have about 150 of these in my house. And not all of them are as friendly as this one. This guy is cute. Some of the others look a lot more tough. The reason that I have them here is that it turns out I've been surrounded by alligators called the internet for the last 40 years. And the problem that we're facing right now with digital preservation is filled with all kinds of alligators. So the first thing that I want to emphasize, and I'll probably say some of this when I'm out with you tomorrow, is that we have to consider this a very long-term problem. This is not something you just solve instantly and then it's all over with. So the problem requires that we have commonality that we maintain for long periods of time. So we need standards that will be stable, that will allow us not only to store information, but move information around, correctly interpreted over tens of years, decades, even centuries. And that's a big challenge. The implication of all this is that we need organizations like schema.org, which we hope will persist over a long period of time to document what the formats are that we will agree to remember and agree to maintain over long periods of time. A similar kind of thing, which has just recently been announced by a number of the cloud computing suppliers, is a data transfer protocol that will allow you to move data from one cloud to another, to make use of containers like Kubernetes. The reason that those concepts are so important in digital preservation is that even if we can't guarantee that any particular cloud operation will persist over a long period of time. If we establish multi-cloud standards so that we can move data back and forth between clouds, then we have the hope of being able to preserve information in different cloud environments and to migrate it over time. Just to give you an example of how stupid I can be, recently I was patting myself on the back because I very carefully and regularly dump my entire personal disk drive to a hard drive, which is plugged in. And this happens to be for my personal financial information and things of that sort, correspondence. So it's an old 17-inch Macintosh laptop. But it runs great, and engineers never throw anything away if it still works. So I'm sitting here dumping this stuff on a regular basis, and then it dawned on me on the weekend that the hard drive that I'm using to save this has a particularly odd format connection, physically odd format connection, something special. I don't remember whether it was Thunderbolt or something from Apple. And I realized that if the laptop failed, that finding a place to plug the Thunderbolt configuration plug into a new laptop might not be available. I might not have any way of converting that. And so my feeling of safety evaporated instantly when I realized that that little cable and connector would be the death of my preservation if I couldn't find any place to deliver the bits coming off of that hard drive. So it just reinforced my concern that we have to think this stuff through and maintain standards with serious longevity. The implication of that, by the way, may be that physical connectors are not our friends at all. I mean, any of you who have been in this game know that cables and connectors are usually the thing that prevents things from moving where you want them to. And so online environments, networked environments where protocols can be maintained regardless of the physical underlying infrastructure may turn out to be really important parts of the solution to long-term digital preservation. Now, I understand that there are a set of questions that have been asked, and so I wonder at what point do you want me to jump into those as opposed to simply rattling away in my usual fashion?
5 more minutes? Yeah, so give us 5 more minutes, then we'll get to the questions.
Okay, great. I have questions that have been sent to me over email, which I'm happy to respond to. Now, there's a second thing. I've been talking technology here and talking about the longevity of standardized protocols. But there is another big problem, and that's business models that will allow us to sustain the operation of storage systems over long periods of time. Think about what the Internet Archive has been able to achieve over the last 20 years or so, which is quite remarkable considering that Brewster has spun that thing up from practically nothing, and he survived for 20 years. Nonetheless, if we're looking for a business model that lasts for 100 years, probably a tin cup is not going to be the solution to that problem. So we're going to have to look for other models in which people are willing to pay for the cost of storage and are willing to underwrite that cost. Now, here's an interesting idea. There's an entrepreneur in the UK who got the idea that we buy insurance policies to benefit our families after we pass away, life insurance. It's really death insurance, but nobody would buy it if you called it death insurance, so they call it life insurance. And of course, the point there is to make an investment over a period of time, paying premiums, so that at the end of the period when you pass away, there will be something to leave to your a legacy, financial legacy to leave to your family. Well, imagine having data insurance. Imagine, in fact, tying those two together. When you sell a life insurance policy, you sell a data insurance policy too. And the insurance company, then invests the data insurance part of the money into a long-term and technologically evolving system, so that when you pass away, your data is available in addition to whatever funds you might leave behind to your family. So this is just one example of a business model. I've been thinking more and more about institutions that have managed to survive over hundreds of years. And there aren't very many of them. A lot of breweries and wineries have lasted hundreds of years, but I haven't been able to figure out how to tie that business model to data preservation, short of storing the data in notes inside of empty wine bottles or something. That's probably not the best tactic. The other side of that, of course, you just drink the wine and forget everything. It doesn't matter. So that's one possibility. Insurance companies have lasted in the order of 150 years or so, which is significant. And then, of course, there's the Catholic Church. That's been around for 2,000 years. And ironically, they were very helpful in the preservation of data during the Middle Ages. They had monks that were copying things on vellum in order to preserve knowledge. In some cases, things coming from Greek and Latin. So I'm not sure that I know how to involve the Catholic Church in our problem, but the fact is they had a business model that lasted for quite a long time. So maybe we need to establish an internet religion that we'll call it geek orthodoxy. And that's how we'll make this stuff last forever. Okay, so that, I mean, Lily, I realize some of this sounds a little silly, but indeed, these issues are things that we have to solve. One other point, and then we'll go on to some of the questions, and that is the fact that if we preserve software, which we must do, in addition to bits of files and things like that, the bits won't mean anything unless they're interpreted correctly, and often that means software. So take an example, a spreadsheet file doesn't mean much unless you have a piece of software that can correctly interpret the spreadsheet and let you interact with it. So we're going to have to save software, but now there are intellectual property issues arising. Who owns the software? Who has the right to use the software? Can the software be shared among a large number of users on a cloud-based system, for example? So do we have to look for special intellectual property legislation which permits people to use software for purposes of preservation? And I don't know the answer to that, but I can easily see lawsuits flying around when you say, well, I'm going to run this older version of software from Microsoft or Apple or something else, and the companies say, wait, that's our property, and you have to get a license to do that. So we have to think our way through that too. So I'm hoping, of course, that this gathering of disruptive personalities will find a way to disrupt some of those problems by taking the appropriate technical and legislative steps, to say nothing of business steps, in order to assemble something that could work over what we all hope will be a significant period of time. Okay, so shall we jump into the questions? And do you have any particular order in which I should try to address them, or shall I just run through them as they arrived in my email?
That would be great. Just start at the top.
Okay, so let me start out by saying the first question was, what innovations could best spur the decentralization of the internet again, both in terms of infrastructure ownership as well as content creation and curation? And that's an interesting question because you're shaking your head. Is that because the audio isn't working?
No, the audio is working fine. We just have we have a question here.
Just ask him to say who asked the question.
Yeah, if you can just say who asked the question would be helpful.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't actually write that down. I just grabbed the questions. I apologize for that.
So it was David Solomonoff.
David Solomonoff asked this question.
Okay. If anyone wants to own up to having asked one of these dumbass questions, they can do that. Okay, so this question arises because of the significant concentration of capacity that's showing in all dimensions, that's showing up at some of the big companies, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Amazon or Facebook and so on. And so that's seen as a kind of centralization. I'm not sure I completely buy that. Of course, I am biased because I work for Google. But I think that there is an economic driver there. And it really, building these big data centers and running them with a great deal of automation, it turns out to be very efficient. And when you try to distribute things and put things in the hands of users and then rely on the users to maintain their software and hardware for the benefit of others on the presumption that everyone is trying to collaboratively and cooperatively share their resources, I worry that it may not work very well because each of the various components may or may not get the support and maintenance that it needs or the upgrades that are needed. And so if you're relying on a distributed framework of voluntary support, I worry that that may not work. So perhaps experiments are in order here to see whether or not that's possible. If we go down that path, then I think we also will have some technological challenges in order to make a variety of disparate hardware and software interwork in an efficient way, that we have ways of finding things. If you look at the way the Amazon and the Google and Microsoft clouds work, they are dense and they are highly organized in terms of finding things. And so that is a significant challenge, I think, in a highly distributed environment. So you color me slightly skeptical about being able to achieve that objective. David asked another question, and since I'm just running down in order, he said, do you see any dangers in the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning for network management? And the answer is, generically, of course there are, because machine learning is still brittle. In other words, the machine learning automatic pattern recognition and optimization, while delivering extraordinary results. I mean, look at what we did in our data centers, where we turned the cooling system over to a machine learning application, and it saved 40% of the cost of power needed to drive the pumps in order to cool the data centers, 40%. So that worked extremely well. On the other hand, I'm sure every one of you has a story to tell about a machine learning algorithm that broke at some point in an embarrassing way, or perhaps more than just embarrassing. So I am a little worried about the brittleness of some of these technology. But for something like network management, where the metric of success...
Is AI to blame for that?
You know what? If anyone, while he's fixing it, this is Visio Tag. They have this really cool video, and I'll send it out to everyone when it's done. In the meantime, why don't you guys raise your hand if you have any questions you want to ask our panel, who are all experienced tech people.
Yeah,
Does anyone have a question they want to ask? And people can come around. Okay, over here.
Just asking to collect
okay.
No, he raised the point about decentralization of the internet, and just, I mean, does that involve blockchain in your opinion?
Any of the panelists can answer that.
Yeah.
Potentially, we're at peak blockchain. We're at the peak hype cycle.
Do you have a microphone?
I don't know.
Yeah, use my.
Yeah, we're at the peak of the hype cycle for blockchain. So it's important not to drink the Kool-Aid. In terms of decentralization, potentially. I mean, that's the current project I'm involved with, Zoetic Networks. We're looking at using blockchain to facilitate micropayments in community wireless networks to allow each router to basically function as an independent, tiny ISP. So, blockchain seems to have the potential to decentralize and facilitate things like micropayments and certain kinds of transactions that would have been where the overhead would have been much greater previously, but still looking at that, and there are a lot of inefficiencies there. I think it's a very young technology, and it may become something completely different before it's widely implemented too.
I think the thing that, I mean, if you look at how the early days of the internet, right, it was supposed to be much more decentralized technology. I think the hope is with blockchain, and I've certainly drunk the Kool-Aid if you've seen me speak before, is that it could bring decentralization back into the fore through incentivization. The challenge with the discussion about large systems like cloud that's so far dominated by Amazon with Microsoft in second place and I think Google in third place and then a couple of other stragglers after that, is, as Vint said, is highly efficient to build systems in that way to guarantee a certain service level agreement. And if we look at how we build enterprise systems, we need those service levels.
Hi, Vint.
And those service levels
Welcome
are
back. We had an
very hard to achieve.
Yes, just give us a minute.
The service levels, as much as we want to believe that blockchain and decentralization is great, the protocols that we have today to incentivize users to contribute CPU power and storage don't actually have an SLA associated with them. So we have to think about, could we incentivize an SLA such that when you're building a decentralized solution on top of decentralized storage and decentralized compute, that we can actually get the same guaranteed levels of service, so we could actually build reliable, enterprise class types of solutions. I'll certainly
Real quick comment, something that's fairly obvious. In a data center, the physical connection between networking equipment and servers is very, very, very short. And you can use, you can connect things however, with whatever technology you wish, with fiber, what have you, or whatever, and be certain that you have a very, very good, reliable connection there. So in a decentralized system, you're relying on, in many cases, the public internet, much slower, much less reliable. So the issue is a lot actual connectivity too, in terms of what you can do in a data center as opposed to basically across the internet, and that's it will continue to be an issue. Either find ways to accommodate the latency and lack of reliability of the public internet, or improve it in some way to get up to the kind of level of reliability and speed that you would have in a physical data center where you may be actually taking server A and directly plugging it into a switch which goes to server B, and you're talking about 2 feet of
I
fiber
just want to say that.
What?
Leave it to the engineers to find all the reasons why it's not going to work. But the answer is yes.
Okay,
That's
and
why you're here tonight.
You know what? We're going to get back to you guys, and you can ask questions, and you can finish talking as soon as Vint has finished his presentation and answers questions. I just want to say that Vint had us do testing, had us get together with Microsoft, get everything working perfectly, because he said that this has happened in the past when he's given a presentation from DC, and of course, it happened here. But it's summer, so just got to go with the flow today.
Thank you. Hey, Vint, thanks so much. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Good. So, it doesn't, oh my God.
Jeez.
Okay, Vint's going to be pretty upset. It's one thing and a lot of things. Okay, so Alan, you were making a comment, and then the next person can hold their hand up.
Well, I made the comment. The answer was just yes. I mean, that's what we're looking at here is the possibility of realizing, at least some part of the dream of the internet. And like everything else, the technology of the internet preceded the web. Right. So, and it preceded video. So a lot of what we're using today is riding on that infrastructure that wasn't designed for it. But look, it's like everything else. It will decentralize a lot of operations, and it's actually going to be a necessity, in my opinion, to the next generation of sort of government management, city management, basically living cities. We're not going to. The next generation of cities will probably double in density. You're just not going to manage it with the infrastructure we have today. So to manage the amount of information, you're going to have everything's going to be a smart contract, and you're going to have machines reading these smart contracts to understand who's going where and how to adapt in real time. This is a given, and it's already the big story that everyone is talking about is, it's not a new story, but it's one they've been talking about just the last year or so, is the country of Estonia. And Estonia has built essentially an entirely digital society. And it's a test lab for this idea. It began because they were afraid of being hacked by Russia. Hello? So And that's over 10 years ago. This is what started it. It's a small country, it's 1.5 million people, and it's homogenous. But the way it works right now is that wherever you go in Estonia, you're being polled, and every device you're carrying is being polled to see who's there, what's there, what do you need, is your car operating, you know, have you paid your taxes, whatever. Everything is done online. Your taxes, your identity, even your citizenship. You can actually buy a digital citizenship to Estonia.
Have you bought one yet? Have you bought one?
Actually, I can claim citizenship in Lithuania, so I'm waiting for Lithuania, which is next door.
But you haven't bought your Estonian one?
To merge, and I get it for free. Excuse me?
Just kidding. Actually, it's an interesting point. I actually, you know, as we get these denser societies around cities, I always ask the question, when are we going to invest in new public infrastructure like subways and roads? And I'm not trying to be an antagonist, because I'm, as I said, a blockchain believer, but as big problems exist in the physical world, when we start to centralize populations as well, and we don't address them, right? I mean, we don't build new roads, we don't build new subways, although we have.
All right, it's funny you should mention that, because I'm actually just doing a white paper on the railroads. I have a personal interest in this, but so the railroads is probably the last living legacy of the beginning of the industrial age, and of course they're all losing money, and they're all dangerous.
In the U.S.
In the U.S., well, is there any other country? Did you know? All right, in the U.S., of course, but a lot of other countries are not that advanced unless they got into railroads later. All right. So the thing about it is that it seems like an impossible solution problem.
Okay, we're going to put Vint up.
Is he back up?
And
Good.
Alan, you can keep talking after Vint's over.
I have a minute break.
I do.
We'll come back to you. Yeah.
Thanks, you guys, for hanging in here. Okay, now it's Vint's turn again. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just sitting here, I'm getting messages saying poor network connection. I'm sitting on a Verizon Fios system that should be running at about 700 megabits a second.
It's probably the Wi-Fi here is the
It's
problem.
probably the Wi-Fi here.
Wi-Fi for Microsoft.
That's weird. I'll tell you what, I moved closer to my Wi-Fi, and we're running out of time here to recover, but let me...
Good, so let me tell you where we lost you.
Yeah, where did you lose
We lost you when we were talking about machine language or machine learning is brittle. And Google saved 40% of their cost of cooling.
That's right. They saved 40% of their power requirements for cooling the data centers. So I've moved now to within 5 feet of a Wi-Fi station. That should give.
Pretty good.
That's probably where the Xbox is.
All right. So let's pick up where we left off with regard to machine learning. I think that there is a brittleness aspect to it, which we need to be careful about, especially if we're talking about network management, network routing, and things of that sort. There's also the potential hazard that someone will have deliberately trained a machine learning algorithm to bias the system, to block certain communications, to do other kinds of things, perhaps more subtle, in order to interfere with communication. So we get into a different situation where someone is trying to interfere with or inhibit freedom of communication. And of course, we want to be careful about that, because the internet was organized around the idea that anything should be able to talk to anything else. So those are just cautionary notes, though. I don't consider that to be definitive, and I do think in the long run that machine learning tools will turn out to be useful for a variety of purposes, not only network management. So I think we should move on, given that we started late and you have other things you need to do. But let me try to quickly go through some of the other questions. The next one was, what are we doing wrong in blockchain? And are we on course to Web 3.0, or are we kidding ourselves? Well, I must confess to you that I'm a bit skeptical about blockchain, only because of it's being overhyped. It can do useful things, but there are some limitations in the current implementations of blockchain. I'm not a big fan of the anonymous blockchain. partly because I think I'm not persuaded by the idea that anonymity necessarily produces good results. I'd much prefer the permission blockchain where you have some idea who you're depending on for the blockchain operation. There is a rate at which the blocks can be formed and signed. That can interfere with having a high-speed transaction-based system that's trying to capture lots and lots of trades, for example, or lots of other actions at high speed. So there may have to be some re-architecting of blockchain implementation to build a kind of a cascade.
Okay. Can you do a Vint Cerf imitation?
Bruce, come up here. Come up here. This is like a crazy meetup. This is, everything usually runs perfectly. We have 300 people. We have, everything runs beautifully. This is Bruce. He's part of the Disruptive Technologists team. He's our, he also is an expert in AI. He speaks fluent French and goes to France very often because the company that the content artificial information company is in France. So he was supposed to do a deep dive into the subject afterwards, but this is going to be a crazy thing, and we have to be out of here at 9. That's my agreement with Microsoft. So we're gonna go ahead and have you guys go ahead and start the panel. And Bruce, you want to just sit up here and be one of the panelists? Come on, because he has lots of really good information to reveal. So I think it would be fun to have him.
Welcome.
Okay, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you sticking with me. And you know what? I would love it if you guys gave me your business card or your email address after this, because everyone who's here has to be a Disruptive Technologist team member.
Laura, can we have the microphone? No, yeah. Well, welcome to Disruptive Technologies. An interesting start. I think the irony that we couldn't get the father of the internet to be able to talk on the internet is slightly ridiculous. Maybe we need blockchain for that. This evening's conversation is on digital preservation, on privacy, on protocols, and how blockchain will work there. My name is Oliver Christie. I'm an AI strategist. I think on AI and quantum, what's coming next. I'm not David. David was going to moderate the panel from MacArthur. He has had a family emergency, so he's been pulled away. So you have me instead. And the red shoes are because I broke my ankle. So it's not a style thing.
Totally fine.
Yeah. So without further ado, we've lost some time, and I want to get to the meat of the subject. Please think of questions. Your questions are going to be smarter than my questions, so we'll get to them at the end. I'll get the panelists to introduce themselves, their name, their job title, and company, and kind of roughly what they do, so you have an idea of their starting point. I'll start from the end. Bruce, go for it.
Hi, Bruce Epstein, knowledge transfer wizard at Avis. And my role is helping businesses make sense of all of these somewhat cutting edge, bordering on esoteric technologies, because most businesses have businesses that they'd like to run, and what they're looking for is how can they stay in business and make money doing it, and that's what I help them do.
Thank you. Actually, I have my own mic. Yeah, I'm Alan Brody, and I'm the startup guy. I help startups find investors. I have a new program called Blockchain Breakthrough. We travel around the country, and we take pitches from blockchain startups and people looking to do ICOs, initial coin offerings. And so I talk to investors. I talk to the startup folks. we're able to project from what the investors are looking for and what the startups are telling us where an industry is headed. And I'm also known for something called Startup Palooza. So if you're not a blockchain company, we also help those kinds of people. Doing this for a long time. And what's really interesting here, I just want to say real quick, is most of the activity we are seeing, the real impetus, is coming from overseas. And this is sort of a new twist in the technology leadership. It ain't coming from us right now.
I'm David Solomonoff, and I was a previous lifetime the president of the New York chapter of the Internet Society, and currently CEO of Zoetic Networks, and our motto is open technology for positive social impact at the intersection of the virtual and physical. So that's a clever slogan. And currently the focus is on wireless community networks for underserved areas as a basis for other types of economic development and decentralization of communications infrastructure and positive social impact resulting from that.
Hi, my name is Nina Knox. I'm a co-founder of Top Ledger Consulting. Just to give you some background, by the way, I co-own this firm with my business partner, Rita. We came from traditional management consulting world, so I worked for management consulting, big four firms. At the same time, I worked for Fortune 1000 companies. I'm a lawyer by education, but most of my career was spent on the business strategy side of things. It's funny because technology people, thought I'm a business person. Business people thought I was, a technology person. But ultimately, throughout my career, I was trying to make sense and build either products or companies and look at business model, technology as a enabler, and ultimately what you're trying to solve for. So for the last year, Rita and I, we made a shift from the traditional management consulting world into blockchain and crypto world. So we help to grow different ventures from different points of their journey. Sometimes it's a pure startup, sometimes it's an established brand, but they're looking for new ways of doing things and, for example, applying blockchain and other emerging technologies. And this is where we come in and help from both business and technological standpoints. And we also run an initiative for family offices and high nets and other institutions because we take the time to educate on the emerging technology and we help to connect the dots between the traditional and emerging world, and similar to you, we help startups to position them when they're ready, in front of investors who frankly need to be educated as well on what's going on in this space and what's a good investment depending on their investment strategy and what they're trying to achieve ultimately.
Great. My name is Yorke Rhodes. I work for Microsoft currently. I have had a long career in technology. I think I only spent a couple years at Goldman Sachs on the other side of the chasm. And I've gone through a number of disruption curves from the early days of the PC to the early days of client-server databases to client-server messaging. To essentially in 2000, I left Microsoft for the first time because I felt like the wireless internet was the next wave, and Microsoft was not doing anything in 2000 in wireless. So I've been sort of in and out of large corporations, and in 2015, I started reading about things that I hadn't seen since my college days when I was studying computer science, like Merkle roots and Merkle trees and directed acyclic graphs and all the technologies around that we talk about now very freely in the blockchain space. So I fell down the rabbit hole in 2015, and I decided, having just returned to Microsoft, either I was going to drag Microsoft down the rabbit hole with me, or I was going to have to leave the company again, and I didn't want to do that. So here we are. And so 3 years ago, I started our blockchain work here at Microsoft. I now sit in our blockchain engineering team. And my role in the engineering team is really to look after the highest profile customers that are actually going to take blockchain solutions into production. And that is a very small number of customers today. If you look at, you can probably count the number of production case studies on one or two hands around the world. It's very hard to get into production. And so that's why we're spending our time there, so that we can make sure that the issues that most customers haven't seen yet, but will see, are actually being addressed in our product suite. So we have probably about 40 different ledger offerings that run in the Microsoft Azure cloud. We have some first-party products that help people get up and running very quickly on blockchain, whether you're doing a testing or a proof of concept or moving into production. And so we're fairly deep in the space for quite a few years.
Anything on Skype? Improve that?
Can't help with Skype. No, actually, the Microsoft Teams product, which is now free, actually is, I think, going to subsume Skype, although it may be using the same protocols, so that might be a problem.
So a note for conversation. We're not going to talk on crypto. That was the last conversation we had a month ago. And if you want to watch the videos, it's all up, it's all posted. And I think it's interesting to talk on blockchain, what else it can do. So blockchain hasn't been around for very long. We're just starting to think about application. So I'll ask the panelists quickly, what's the one thing that makes you really excited about blockchain, about how you'd want to use it? Let's go from this end.
How many words?
5. Quick, let's be quick.
Digital uniqueness.
Okay, dive in a bit more.
Bitcoin basically taught us that you could actually create digitally unique assets that essentially became Bitcoin. And that is one of the fundamental characteristics of blockchain, even in a permissioned context, that actually is something that is the transformative thing. That if we look at blockchain as a transport, blockchain as a way to reference data like an index, those are great and they will save efficiencies and money in corporations, but the real, I think, transformative qualities are when we can start to say, here's a unique thing, and that now I can actually represent something like a physical object uniquely in a digital form, and know that that digital representation is unique.
So what's coming next for Microsoft? What's the product we'll see and get excited by?
We have a lot of 6 or more different initiatives going on in terms of product. We are very friendly to the open source community. That's why I mentioned there's about 40 different ledger stacks that run on our cloud. We're actually not building ledger technology. We're building the surrounding tools around the ledgers so that enterprise can actually adopt those ledgers.
Fantastic. Nina, you work
What a
with...
disappointment we can't talk about crypto now, just joking. But, I actually believe blockchain introduced, even if we don't talk about crypto, an alternative asset class, right? And some of the processes that we just, or things that we couldn't, do previously. I know I'm going to simplify it. I like to take very complex things and break them down into very digestive, simple things. But to me, it's people, process, technology, right? I mean, it's pretty simple ultimately. So, to me, is it really such a new concept? Yes, it's flipping the model. It's making things, more intriguing. But some of the things that we're even tackling today, it's not something that is, so new. I really like the idea of new asset class, and by asset class, it can be, payment, but also, and we'll talk about it hopefully when we come to the topic of privacy. It's the data, right? The data that we carry and own or not own, depending, right, on where we go with this as, human beings, consumers, patients. So to me, it's a new way of, processing and transacting with those alternative assets that we couldn't do previously.
Now you consult with many different clients. Are you finding you're having to lead the technology conversation, or are people up to speed on what's possible?
It depends. I know you hate this answer probably, but we have
it's
different.
A good consultant's answer.
No, I am a consultant in space, but sometimes, and I joke about it, like you get emotionally attached to certain projects and clients. But again, clients come to us and sometimes, oh my gosh, blockchain, so we need to do something with blockchain. So let's take a step back. What are you guys trying to solve for, right? I mean, what are we trying to do? And then let's decide if blockchain is the right right, technology. I mean, we have some clients that use a combination, like a hybrid of different technologies, even though they're trying to solve one business problem. So, I mean, I can talk about it. Some use AI, right, and then blockchain, and then some things from the traditional data and analytics world. So it's not always the magic bullet, but so we help to co-develop things sometimes. And again, it depends on the team. I mean, we've seen clients with very strong, technological teams, and then we've had, clients with, very strong, business background, but they're lacking, technology backgrounds. And sometimes clients are self-aware, sometimes they don't. And I think this is our job as a doctor to business to help to diagnose and sometimes help outside in help.
Is this the same with the rest of the group? So David, do you see the same things happening?
Yeah, okay. So we've, money has actually been mostly digital for a long time. We have had digital currencies. We've had distributed databases, large distributed databases used in normal commercial and government operations for a long time that are really more robust and reliable and much faster and scale much better than blockchain. So you do have to ask what is blockchain good for? What is the promise? Not necessarily realized now, but it may be some different type of blockchain-related technology that gets there, is for intermediation and decentralization. So things like a lot and the ability to integrate across a much bigger playing field, so to speak. So the ability, my friend Ted there in the audience is working on and I'm helping him with a project to basically verify the origin, proper labeling, and safety of seafood across the supply chain. So the capability of the blockchain to facilitate communication and monitor the provenance of something across a very complex, long supply chain. Those are types of capabilities that the blockchain has more, the ability, that interoperability across a lot of different kinds of environments. Those are kinds of things that a promise that is really different and new. But again, not necessarily there yet. It's not going to work, as Nina was saying. A lot of situations where it's not appropriate. It's a buzzword, and people maybe want to jump on the bandwagon, but it isn't necessarily there. And even for the things that it's being used for, the technology may still be too slow, frankly, insecure, and not scale properly, or be too compute and energy intensive, which was kind of basically with Bitcoin. The original developers are kind of libertarians. They were thinking we want a digital equivalent of the gold standard for a currency. So we're going to use power and compute as a replacement for a precious metal. That was the thinking.
I'll put you on the spot. What do you think the time frame is looking like?
I don't know that.
How long for seafood?
That's a different ballgame. Yeah.
There's a question.
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Depends on what you
Yes, I was wondering how the blockchain actually assures that in the dark of night, one crate of fish won't be switched for another.
Great question.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Technical.
I can answer that. We're looking at devices, and there are massive problems in the seafood industry. It's a terribly corrupt industry. 40% of seafood is mislabeled. It's not what you think it is. And we're looking at tracing the weight of ships. If the weight changes, and that's something that has to be taken into consideration, the devices themselves have to be tamper-proof. And there are some major obstacles involved. But the oceans are in trouble. And we see blockchain having the potential of coordinating a global effort to save the oceans within the next 20 years.
20 years, okay, thank you.
I think to answer your question in a more general way, what blockchain is doing is it's letting you actually create verifiable data that's attributed to specific sources. So if you can actually do that, you can have bad actors in the system that eventually get exposed. You could, and that's an example where you might be swapping out something, and then the places that you actually do the scans, the more data you collect, the more verifiable you've got, and the more closed system you have. So it's not perfect, but the concept of knowing verifiably the actor who wrote the data to the chain, whether it's an IoT device or an individual working in a warehouse or distribution center, actually helps with creating the verifiable sources of what's going on. And then associated with that is reputation, because bad data is just as good in determining reputation as good data, right? So if you can trace back to the place in your supply chain where goods seem to be falling off the ship or falling off the truck or becoming not what they were originally, then you can actually get verifiable tracking about the source of the issue.
Bruce, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, actually, if we were sitting in Paris, somebody in the audience probably would know the answer, but is anybody here in any way connected with the supply chain implementation of blockchain being done by the Carrefour distribution group, the largest retail group you've probably never heard of, because they're not present in the US, but they are second to a certain Arkansas-based chain everywhere else in the world. Or as you'd probably say here, it's Carrefour, but that's not how it's said everywhere. Anybody happen to be? I'm not. I wish they were one of my clients, but they're not.
I've eaten there.
But if anybody does, they are using blockchain, or at least they announced that they're using blockchain to guarantee the traceability of all of their food products, or not all yet, but they're rolling it out food line by food line for exactly all those same problems, or same reasons, sorry, so that they can guarantee the traceability of every item from the farm where it was produced to the client at the supermarket. But I admit that, not knowing that I was going to be on the panel tonight, I didn't take the time to find out whether how far along they have gotten in their implementation.
I'm thinking.
Actually, I want to step in here because
Walmart is doing that too.
Yeah. So the one word that comes to mind, and then I'll come back to the fish, is what is the word I have in mind?
Identity?
Yeah, it's actually a confluence. So the word I would choose is confluence. And I'm reminded of Ernest Hemingway once said, I went broke two ways, gradually and then suddenly. And I thought that's actually really interesting, because that actually applies to most technologies, especially disruptive ones. Things happen gradually and little bits and pieces. And then something comes along and brings it all together, and it really makes it work. And I think that blockchain is the suddenly. The gradually are things like the seafood, the food chain. Now the food chain, so just so happens that there are about 1,700 species of fish. But there's only 700 recognized by the FDA. I mean, 1,700 species of fish that are sold in the US, but only 700 are actually recognized. So in other words, there are about 1,000 species of fish that the supermarkets are relabeling as something else. Well, we don't know what that is. So blockchain it could address that. But if you think about the food chain, it's not just the species or where it came from. It has to be properly refrigerated all the way. So how do you know that? Now, big transportation companies have been using RFID. I've seen pictures going back for about 10 years of various forms of RFID on the pallet, on the container that measures the temperature, and none of these are standardized. So Carrefour, or however you pronounce it, might actually have been doing it, but Walmart probably wasn't, or maybe they were. Now was it the FDA? No, the health department. I'm trying to think who legislates this. If you have a restaurant today, in order to get certification, to get your A, you have to follow HACCP guidelines. Now, HACCP guidelines means that you have to tell them what happens when the food appears at the door and every step of the way until it gets to the consumer's plate. Obviously, they can't really monitor that. But with blockchain, you could. So what I'm saying is that all of these ideas, all of these mandates, unfunded or undoable, have been kicking around because people in government have all day long to sit around and think about what you should do, but they're not implementable. And then suddenly, blockchain comes along and says, well, you know what? Where you say to yourself, well, you know what? There's a confluence here. You could actually implement them. So I'm going to say that the force of necessity meeting the possibility of blockchain is unstoppable. And it's going to appear in a powerful way.
Absolutely. Let's change tactic or change approach. Blockchain is the technology underneath. But to make it work, we need to understand privacy and social privacy. Nina and Yorke, how are you seeing companies thinking about privacy of their customers?
You want to?
Yeah, I'll take that again. It's not a new topic, right? Privacy. I mean, we can talk about it from a business standpoint, legal standpoint, and technology standpoint, right? And I think depending on use case, I always say let's agree on operational definitions, like what we mean by privacy. Like privacy, me as a human being, right? And we've all seen the latest news, what's going on with data that's being collected about us, like privacy. It's right. It's not news. That's what I'm trying to say. That the issue of privacy. I mean, it's been a hot topic for many years, and hence all these laws and regulations. And just for a second, going back, to fish and food supply chain. So I just want to be very careful that we just don't take blockchain before we can get into privacy just for a second, okay? So I don't lose my thought here and apply it, to existing traditional processes, because to me, blockchain is challenging all of us collectively, because maybe some of the existing processes are so over-engineered to begin with. So before taking blockchain and applying it to food industry, to any supply chain for that matter, right? Or medical field or drug development. I mean, I'm sure collectively we can come up with 100 different use cases and processes. It's process improvement before you decide what technology you're going to apply, right? Yes. So again, and this is where management consulting hat comes in, because just because you come to me and you say, we've been doing it for so many years, it doesn't mean that that's the most efficient way of doing things. And I understand that as human beings and businesses, we have to follow all these laws and regulations, and sometimes they are contradictory within one jurisdiction. Like in one country, you can hear my accent, I'm European, right? Most of my career has been done here in the US, but I grew up in Russia, Moscow, so I mean, I'm educated in Russia, so it's almost like, it's like two different worlds. But let's bring it home for a second to the US. So before we even apply, technology, just to give you some perspective, and I'm, taking it broader, but I want people to understand this, that there is a lot of initiatives going on right now in Congress too, and there is a lobbying organization like Chamber of Digital Commerce, because if you think about it, our laws and regulations are so behind, and people who have been behind those, regulations, I mean, they're not technology savvy or equipped even to drive the further change. So, Rita and I have been ambassadors of the chamber, and based on what was shared with us, only 4% of, Congress has any. I'm
going to ask a similar. So,
I just want to throw out 4 letters even before we get any farther. GDPR.
Right, exactly. But my point is, before we get into privacy, right, in all of the things, I want us to get aligned, like what it means in operational definition, and then I think there is no one, unified definition, because depending on use case and industry.
Can I ask what the Microsoft view of this is? In that Microsoft has done a really good job of privacy. You guys don't get hacked very often.
I mean, it's not just about getting hacked. It's what you choose to store. And this is actually specific to blockchain, where we have an opportunity to either do things well or not well in terms of technology and private data. And there's a pretty big movement within the blockchain space to look at consumer-owned data in a way that we don't look at it today at all, right? Because all of us probably have like 30 or 40 different logins to different systems like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and every other one, where all of our data is stored, right? And so there's an opportunity recognizing the unique key capability of blockchain that could actually represent the root of source data for a identity, which then could be unlocked only by consumers when they choose to unlock it for specific periods of time and consent.
Is that going to be the business model of Microsoft going forward, do you think?
I mean, Microsoft's business model today, if you look at our business model, it is essentially about cloud services and also edge services. So to the extent that we can change how we think about cloud and drive those capabilities down to small edge devices, including IoT devices, that creates sort of a very stable API across lots of different form factors where you could actually develop applications on top of it. And if you look generally at Microsoft's long history, it's about creating APIs such that other people can be successful building their businesses on top of those.
I just want to say, if you're looking for a new religion, I think privacy might be the new religion. Because we pray for it, but by the same token, we're willing to give up on it pretty easily. As Facebook discovered, just give the consumers something they want and they'll give up all kinds of privacy. But I think what you're really asking for, and by the way, look at Oprah. I mean, Oprah has people expose secrets that they wouldn't tell their families, but they'll go on national TV. So
I never thought we'd have a blockchain conversation with Oprah getting into that.
And religion.
She probably has lots of bitcoins. She probably has a bunch. But anyway, the point is that I think what we're talking about is two slightly different things. One is privacy and one is hackability or data integrity. And I think we all want that. I mean, we want to know that anything that's on the blockchain, if we say that we don't give permission, that's solid and it can't be hacked. So hacking versus privacy, I think, is two slightly different things. Privacy is probably, I mean, the GDPR is a European law, and it's not as important to us. I mean, we say it is, but the consumers will give it up for a goodie.
But I think consumers need education. And by the way, how many in the room believe that you should own your consumer data? How many of you believe that you currently own your consumer data? All right, so
we know the answer to that.
Same with health data, right? So
Right, but I mean, the other question, and I want to just real quick, and how many of you would pay to use Facebook, Google, blah, 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 every time you use it? Just pay by the drink.
Okay,
We've got a couple of people
No,
who
no,
say
Everybody
Pay
says, it's
for
like
it.
asking people, what do you read? Oh, I read Time Magazine. But actually, you read People, and if you can, you pick up the Post on the way back.
You already
I think the question should be how many people are willing to give their information and you will be compensated, right, for it. So I think that's a different question. If somebody is using your information, I think you should have a right to give this information, but you also should have a choice to decide whether you want to be compensated for that data.
David,
and I think that's a more philosophical question.
Do you agree, or do you? I can see you disagreeing.
Yes, I'm not sure that that's necessarily. So I do agree with that. Yeah, I do agree that if Facebook is selling my data, that maybe I should have a piece of the action. But maybe I don't want them to do that. That's the other factor. The other thing is that people are paying for some of these services indirectly, so that if, for example, as has been proposed, and I believe the Brave web browser has this capability built into it where money can go into a pool, and then that can go to reward content creators where you visit a website frequently, and then you put a little bit of money into a pool, and they get a little dividend from that, or a royalty. That's a viable thing, and also the fact that you pay. Probably everybody here, as I'm guessing, pays a fair amount for their connectivity between your home internet and your mobile phone and things like that. If through that there was a fund that was used to, compensate content providers, that would be pretty more efficient and could be done if it were done with micropayments and perhaps the blockchain.
So let's
that
jump
would
on
be
that for a second.
Right.
For each of the panelists, what is if you're going to use blockchain, or what company would you invest in or service you'd back that's coming up? What are the things that excite you most about where we're going? Bruce,
I can tell you that from the deals that I've seen in the last 6 months, and the ones that the investors are most ready to invest in, they tend to work around accreditation. So, for example, I saw a Princeton professor that has a plan to convert all degrees onto the blockchain. So you get a degree, you have a smart contract. Anybody asks, you're applying for a job and you got a PhD, I don't have to go calling the college that you happen to go to. It happens to be in the British Virgin Islands, but it broke away in the last storm. I can't find it. It's on the blockchain.
And how much did that company raise?
I think they were looking for a couple $1 million. Okay. I don't remember what the deal was.
It's a pretty simple function.
Yeah.
Right, but this is the low-hanging fruit. This is the stuff that you can get into, and I see that across the board. I've seen it doctors. I've seen it in deal accreditation. I've seen it in consolidating real estate deals.
Can you tell me why that example? Why blockchain rather than just a distributed ledger?
Well, because it comes up immediately. Anyone can see it, and it can't be hacked. I mean, there are ways that you can actually. There are ways that you could complicate the search, or it just costs money. So there are a lot of companies just don't want to spend the time or the money to go check, did you have all those degrees? We'll take the word for, maybe they'll check one degree but not the others. But it really shows up in professional circles. So the one that I've seen recently is with doctors. Turns out hospitals spend about $7,000 to check to accredit their doctors in the emergency rooms and elsewhere. It costs about $7,000. And they do it because they have huge liability, among other things. So if that's on the blockchain, they immediately save $7,000 plus it takes about 2 months. So this cascades through in higher professional levels. Engineers, if they're certified to anything to do with structural engineers, there's huge liability involved. So you want to know all those people also, and then you can go into materials and so on and so forth. But those are the ones that investors see. Well, investors always look for the low-hanging fruit. Like what can we deliver what we can make money out of right now?
Can I ask a clarifying question? I'll play the consultant for a moment.
Please.
You said distributed ledger or blockchain. Did you mean permission blockchain or public blockchain?
I was thinking more public.
Okay.
But,
which the difference would be incentivization.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
basically the difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
David, what technologies or companies do you love out there?
Let me just jump before that. Just say, really want to make it clear here: a blockchain is not perfectly secure or a perfect security solution. It was generally thought that it's very difficult with the way the blockchain works, with multiple verifications of each transaction and a voting system, and the complexity of the crypto tech, that it was too difficult to corrupt the data in a blockchain. But recent studies and experiments have shown that it takes fewer miners who are corrupt to basically poison the well than was previously thought. So you don't want to be really naive here and just assume that this is something set in stone that can never be hacked or where the data can be corrupted. That would be a very wrong set of thinking. This is the space I'm talking about is a very big one, and I will cheerfully admit that there are a lot of things happening there that I'm not following. But what really interests me is the ability for basically bandwidth, power, computing, storage, and content to be produced at the edge of the network and sold with micropayments that way. So companies that I'm currently talking to, helping with Zoetic, Althea Mesh is a company that is developing a platform for basically for you to be a mini ISP with firmware in your router. And LO3 Energy, based in Brooklyn, is doing using Ethereum, basically a virtual machine, to allow for credits on a solar microgrid to be sold. So your on a local community microgrid with solar power, but maybe you live in have a basement apartment, so you can't obviously get solar power, but you can arrange to purchase it. Then maybe you put a battery in your basement, and then you're on the network too helping. You can get compensated that way. That the system will adjust to that and start giving you credits.
Nina, what's the most exciting project you're working on at the moment?
Well, I have many projects, but I love and hate those questions like, what's the best project, right?
Your favorite child?
Because it's almost like when you're shopping, for a house, every investor has their own appetite and strategy. So we talk to different VCs and family offices and high nets, and I see investors make decision every day. So I guess my questions back to you would be, are you looking for something quick liquidity, or are you looking for some more sustainable business model? Again, it's like investing 101, right? And some investors choose to diversify their portfolio. So again, nothing new I'm going to share with you here. So personally, what I like, anything that is infrastructural play, right? Because I believe that if you're building something that will disrupt or at least bring some, efficiency to any industry, that's always attractive. I personally spent about 4 years, and I didn't say this in my introduction, it was done in Bradstreet. I was doing their intellectual property, so I was fascinated about patents and the hidden value that patents have, those intangible assets. So one of my clients right now, IPV, they are doing something that has not been done before. They're creating one global database of all patents, and I don't know how much everybody knows about intellectual.
Is this US-based or European-based?
It's an interesting project because the CEO, he's American, but he is actually based in Paris, in France right now, and I've heard that Paris is like an AI capital of the world right now. So for whatever reason, it's a global team. Again, I heard the comment before that, we see many projects, coming from different geographies. I see a blend. Yes, there is a lot of, good stuff coming from Eastern Europe and from Asia, but I also see some brilliant, people here in the US. I'm very global and open-minded in that regard. I love the global teams too. So back to my favorite project, it's that intellectual property. And anything and everything that takes out unnecessary over-engineered processes or middleman, because I just don't want to pay for more than I should. And if we can simplify something, and especially for the younger generation, just because we didn't have something or we're used to doing things this way, I don't think that it's the right way, and it can apply within the large organization. I mean, we all spent years with large organizations when everybody talks about change management, operational excellence, and I think there are so many opportunities right now outside of organizations. So when we create those, ecosystems, if you ask me personally, I would like my health data to put in a centralized, place, so I don't have to repeat same information over and over.
And it doesn't have to be centralized to do that.
Yeah. I mean, like when I say centralized, you know what I mean. But like at least like so people can access it, right? So that's great correction.
So let's go on this question. Would you trust a large corporation, or would you trust the government to hold that data? And this is a question for all the panel.
I trust an organization that allows me to store data in their infrastructure that I hold the keys for.
Great answer.
Okay. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, because to me, government is the organization too, just a different type of organization. So it's not the organization, it's the process, right? So I don't really care who holds the other key, but I should have that, private key.
Okay, so if you're going to actually take that tact, I would trust an organization more than a government.
Yeah, what do you think?
I like the idea of personally holding the keys. I think that's important. And finding some way to verify publicly verify. Again, it kind of goes to open source, verifying all the infrastructure as not having a backdoor or what have you. Can't guarantee that, but that's. I know people who are very, from the open source and what you call the cyber liberties camps, who are still very suspicious of things like cloud computing, and really believe that you should have your own physical hardware someplace under lock and key. And I do actually still sympathize with that. I'm thinking that, and I'm not quite sure where I am with this, but I'm thinking that the physical ownership of something that, some kind of storage of something like a key, maybe, or some kind of very limited, even limited capacity computing device, may remain essential in terms of privacy and security.
So I'm going to let's carry on with that.
I mean, the answer is, of course not. How could you trust any of these institutions? Because their interests are always going to trump yours if they deem it so. So if the government thinks that their interest is more important than yours, they're going to take your data and use it. And to some extent, companies would too, although you have, they don't have immunity, so you could actually take action against them under certain circumstances, like they're still alive to be done. So the answer is no, of course not. But functionally, depending on the motivation at the given time, you could probably trust them to some extent. But you know what? I think that we have a lot of objections to. It just reminds me of the early days of the internet. I mean, I had all kinds of objections. I remember in the early days of the internet, we said, well, why do you need the internet? Why do you need to go on the web to look at pictures when CD-ROM does a great job? And it was true. The web was terrible and it was slow, but CD-ROMs were great. And the answer is real simple. The answer was, once you put a CD-ROM on the internet, you realize its limitations. There's not a lot. In other words, the internet was infinite and the CD-ROM was finite. So too much ain't enough, and so people wanted a lot more. And any company, like catalog companies who went to CD-ROMs, quickly realized the internet put them out of business. And so what happened was the problems that they all raised, it's not good enough, it's too slow, it's the 64K modem, whatever, they were all solved. The digital divide. The poor people will not be able to afford a computer, and it's going to be terrible. And the poor people found computers very easily.
We still have the digital divide.
I mean, there are very poor people, of course, but at a certain level, most people who wanted a computer could get one, and they did. Now, obviously, there's always going to be people who don't have a car.
Depends on how you define a computer.
There are people who don't have a car, but enough people have computers that it's considered universal. Now, but my point is this: a lot of these things will be solved. So the privacy issue, as opposed to the data security issue, and I'm going to focus on data security because I think the privacy is a moving line. All right, I think people want privacy today until you say, but it's going to cost you $100 a month to go to do a search. You go, well, maybe I'll give up some privacy. So that's mutable. But I think that we will rise to solve these problems. I mean, if blockchain is not trustworthy right now, then think of what did Hitler do in the Second World War? He almost won on privacy, if you will, or data encryption by using the Enigma machine. So I look at it and say, well, what is the Enigma machine? The Enigma machine meant that every time a transmission took place, both machines reset. And the only reason we were able to crack it is because we were able to capture one Enigma machine. Well, if I were a cryptologist, I'd say, well, let's turn every blockchain contract into an Enigma device. And every day you check in and you get a whole new resetting, and no one can crack it unless they have that device at the given time. Well, some variation of it. So I'm not an expert on this, but I guarantee you there are really, really smart people who will think about this, and if there's enough reward for it and there's enough need for it, they'll solve it. But at the end of the day, just remember that the guy that figured out the NSA was stealing our data, what's his name again?
Snowden.
He wasn't the only one, Edward Snowden.
All right, Snowden, right. So Snowden, cracked the code on the federal government. They're a bunch of liars. Okay, fine. But where did he go and take refuge? Yeah, he went to Russia, which obviously is the home of openness and transparency and democracy. So, you ponder that.
Hey,
okay?
I hold a Russian passport here.
I'm not picking on you.
Just to clarify, and you can correct me on this, but Russia is not what it seems to be, and it's not any type of governmental system or society that is really much like anything else. They were traumatized by their experience with communism. There are some odd remnants of that, but it's really a new and hybrid system that does not fit into the traditional definition of a communist dictatorship, a capitalist democracy, or anything else. Would you agree?
Well, I don't want to get into the...
I think we shouldn't go too far off topic.
If you stay in power for that long, there's something wrong.
Yeah,
Right, but I mean, I like to take the best from, all countries and all political systems, and luckily I can speak to those, but I think I would bring it back to you to focus on the business and
let's
technology
focus
side.
more on,
right.
shall we say, solving problems. Bruce,
Can I
how
answer
do
the
you
question
feel
about trust first?
Yeah, trust I think
Okay.
is interesting.
From a purely human perspective, there are two kinds of trust. There's a naive trust and there's an enlightened trust. And there are two kinds of distrust. There's a cynical distrust and there's a healthy distrust. And I'm bringing all this up because, and I'd actually like to ask the question, besides, I know that Nina and Oliver have, and myself, who in the room has lived for any extended time in another country?
Define extended.
Okay, that's amazing. Okay, you have all experienced other kinds of trust.
That's right.
In those kinds of societies, trust is earned and distrust is healthy. One of the first things, and sorry, this is a very personal story, when I stepped off the plane just about 2 years ago, after spending all that time in Paris, the unhealthy distrust hit me in the face like walking out here on a hot day. When you walk through the door, that's how strong it is. So the question about would you trust organizations, whether they be government or private, with personal data, those of us who have spent time in other societies, we learn to do that. I don't know if it's possible, although I would hope from an optimistic, humanistic standpoint that it is possible to get back to that point in this country. And that's all I'll say about it.
But I think any human, in any relationship for that matter, and we talked about it before the panel, it's about trust and forgiveness, right? So even if you bank with financial institutions every day, right? And I mean, I know that in the traditional banking system, our investments are insured, but breaches happen all the time, right? Do you switch, and I'm just giving it as an example, right? Do you switch your financial institution right away, or because you've been banking with them for over 20 years, you tend to stay? And just going back to previous comments about that, everybody, somehow got access to laptop. There is another huge issue that almost 2 billion people on Earth are unbanked right now. So things that all of us take for granted, they just simply, don't have. And the only, possession that they may have right now is like a cell phone. And here's a beautiful opportunity when...
Now, do you think blockchain is the solution?
Well, I think, so to what problem?
Exactly.
Get the question.
I mean, the way you defined it, and I agree with you, there are many, many people in the world who we call unbanked, but it's actually not that they're unbanked, it's that they don't have credit because there's no established digital history of their economics.
I have to correct you on that. Before coming to this country, I never even knew a concept of credit, but I was still banking.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So to me, even having some financial transactions, right, without credit history, has a way of...
So something like M-Pesa is not a bank, right, but it's a way to do currency transfer between individuals through a cell phone, right?
Right.
And yes, it is very
since
specific.
you mentioned it, so there's a blockchain startup that is looking to put the ownership rights of people in poor countries and slums and what have you on the blockchain.
Land ownership.
Land ownership. So it's property rights, which is a big issue, and so that way these people can start to build credit. They can start to monetize or borrow against their ownership, and right now most of these countries don't recognize slum dwellers and their property rights. So that would enable it, and that would be what, 2 billion people possibly. And you know what? Again, this gets back to the Hemingway idea. That idea of letting the slum dwellers, the people in informal cities, to have ownership of the land, that's been going around for about 15 years. And then the idea is, wow, if you were able to do that, you could unlock all this value. But there was no easy way to document their ownership. In fact, I actually wrote a book about this guy was given land, a tribe that was given land in Africa, and they only got their deed. The land was given to them by a Zulu king, and he just gave it to them. He didn't sign anything. He said, "This is yours." Well, that land was considered worthless because it was on the waterfront. Well, 150 years later, they got their deed. Once they got the deed to that land was worth $500 million.
Let's talk about the waterfront. Let's talk about the exciting things that can happen because we've got blockchain. David, are you seeing things that are only going to be possible?
I'm going to describe something very negative.
Oh, please, please do.
Okay. I'm going to describe something very negative, dystopic, to put things in context. And we'll start from not the blockchain. The NSA has a program called Skynet, yes, like in the Terminator movie, where they accumulate data, metadata from social activities on social networks, and in some cases metadata from email. Put it together, and they extract from this using machine learning. It's a huge data set. Recommendations for targeted assassinations of terrorists, which are then the recommendations are farmed out to different agencies like the CIA or other intelligence agencies. That's kind of creepy, but let's take it another step. There's a cool new startup called Augur, and they use it based on, it's a blockchain platform using Ethereum, but that doesn't really matter. And that's for a predictive market. So it's like a hedge fund being implemented in a very cool way on the blockchain. So you could bet on something that, like commodities, on the price of pork bellies or something if you wanted to. But some clever people are putting out bets on who will be assassinated. So in effect, using the blockchain, you have an open market for targeted assassinations. And there's kind of hands-free, hands-off kind of thing. I just bet, that some political figure I don't like is going to be murdered, and then there is creating a financial incentive through speculation for that to happen.
That was happening before blockchain, though.
Yeah.
I mean, Augur is a copy of non-blockchain based systems.
Right. Oh, right. There you go.
This sounds just like an episode of Black Mirror, which is where we're heading, maybe.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So
let's have the positive.
Okay.
The internet created porn, right? Essentially.
Is that a positive?
Wait a minute.
I don't know.
I have my kid in the room, sorry.
Is this the Microsoft view of...
Actually, it's the other way around.
What? Porn created the internet?
Yeah. And I mean, that's a fact, because the first big data center down here was Global, what do you call himself? I don't know, it was an IPO, it was a $120 million IPO, and they had the first data site in New York. The guy who started, I'm not going to mention his name, actually started as a subcontractor to AT&T, handling all their porn that they did not want to carry themselves. And that grew into the first data center in New York. So I mean,
this is the only thing this audience will now remember from this talk.
It probably will.
There's actually, I won't mention the name, but there is a blockchain startup that is on the forefront of many things like one-way payment channels and things like that, very specifically because of trying to solve for this problem set.
Right.
They actually presented it at the last meetup.
But I want to raise an idea, and this is really an idea, okay? But it's a very plausible one, just because of the negative thing that you brought up about the assassination, blockchain assassination, the blockchain.
Okay.
So how about the NRA? Oh, not the NRA. The ATF puts all licensed gun owners on the blockchain. Now just imagine this. Now, if they have medications, and we can cross-reference that to their medical history, and they take psychoactive drugs, and they're not taking the medications, that should be automatically come to our attention. And their right to own that arm could be rescinded. You know what? My point is that if you see the
pro-gun person, I guess.
You really have to read what happened in Estonia, because they actually enable the harmonization of non-citizens and citizens simply by their digital rights. And I'm saying we have an impossible problem here. Here in New York, guns are illegal. Terrible. You go 2 states over and they're totally legal. Now, how do you manage that? Good old boy from the Pocono Mountains showing up in New York with a truckload of guns that he's going to unload in East New York, which happens all the time. Well, he just shows up in New York. Well, guess what? In a blockchain world, it's possible to harmonize cities that don't allow guns with cities that do and keep them safe. Right now, we don't have a functional way of doing it.
It's not the blockchain, it's not the technology, it's the consensus and rules of engagement as the society.
No. What I'm talking about is that when you cross the George Washington Bridge, you'll have scanners that read all the permissions of every vehicle passing by. Now, do we want that? That's a big debate, but what I'm saying, what is possible is this. Now, I could argue, I brought up the railroads. So this is a legacy industry, and we think it's dead. It's troublesome. We put up with it. But Donald Trump exists today because he was $900 million in debt, but he owned a rail yard on the west side. And that property, he was able to raise enough money to get his business back up and running. The Hudson Yard sits on an old rail yard that's worth $1 billion in revenue. So what I'm saying is some of these legacies can be transferred into the next wave. So if you add technology, if you add blockchain to, for example, the railroads, think about at nighttime when everyone's going north, but there's only one rail line going north, the other one's going south. In a blockchain world, every train would have a contract, and you would be able to send all the trains north on both lines and have the southbound trains knowing when to switch from side to side and essentially stitch the way down. So you're able to add a level of intelligence.
I feel this is a book here. But let's stop here to say we're living in a blockchain world. It's coming, and it's going to affect everything from fish to porn to politics to banking. We hope it's going to be global. We hope it's going to affect everyone, and it's going to be more positive than not. I hope, as you see, we had very different views tonight. A lot of passion, different views on where we're going to be and where we're heading. So thank you to the panelists for all their views. Thank you.
Thank you. This was totally interesting.